Growing Up Weird.
Hi, you are listening to Growing Up Weird with Dr. Gwen Bradbury and with me, Greg Dickens. This is a podcast about how being raised in a weird environment, that's W-E-I-R-D, Western educated, industrialized, rich and democratic environments, affect our long-term health. And why is that? Why are we looking at that? Because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Getting these things fixed when people are very, very young gives them many years of better health. This is effectively the stuff they don't teach you at NCT or med school, really. This is recent findings arranged in a way, hopefully, to make them delicious, delectable, digestible, and all of those other things. Get them in your brain and enjoy them. We're going to talk about a little bit of news, as we do every week. Then we're going to get into the topic of the week, which this week I should have written down. Gwen, what is our topic this week?
This week we're talking sleep.
Oh, very nice. Right, so we are talking sleep and picky sleeping, which is a phrase you will come to learn and love. All right, let's start with a little bit of news. Gwen, what is your news this week?
So my news this week is that a study has come out from the Global Burden of Disease Study 2021 in the Lancet Journal. But what that study says that's really surprising and shocking, surprising, maybe not, shocking, definitely yes, is that they expect 1 in 6 children and adolescents worldwide to have obesity by 2050. And this is really a terrifying statistic, and one that I think is very close to our hearts, because we have seen, living in South America, living in Africa, how when a Western diet is exported to different cultures, we also export all the health problems that go along with a Western diet. And where we've historically thought about malnutrition in countries that are more low income, we are now seeing obesity and overweight being the major causes of malnutrition. And it's quite a sort of an image shift in terms of how we think about ill health around the world. And I've done a load of work on this in the last year or so as part of my job. And it's just quite shocking to see the numbers so stark here. One of the pieces that they talk about being particularly important is they're trying to think about how they can reduce the rates of children and adolescents with overweight and obesity, because clearly current strategies are not having an effect on curbing it. But one of the key populations that they're looking at is girls aged between 15 and 24, because the challenge is that if those young women have the health problems that we associate with Western diets, then they're much more likely to pass on the changes in their bodies, the epigenetic changes, to their offspring as well. And it was something I sort of hadn't really thought about when you were looking at overweight and obesity in children, that actually it's so important to focus on those young women who are going to be the mothers of tomorrow.
The contagious people, epigenetically.
Yeah, exactly. I hadn't thought about it like that. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Also interesting is the fact that the phrase overweight itself is a contagious meme. Have you ever noticed how medical professionals talk about overweight as a phrase, whereas most people in the lay public would say, as I would, being overweight. It's interesting how othering that can be, and how it marks out people who've looked at this from a medical point of view versus people who haven't.
I think there's a really big linguistic difference as well. If obesity is defined as a disease, which medical professionals typically see it as, or if it's seen as being part of an identity, or if it's seen as being something that a non-medical person is talking about, actually the choices of language that each of those groups use has to be different because of their ability to make a diagnosis, so to speak.
Sure.
And because of their own feelings about their own bodies. I just think there's so much more linguistic nuance now in talking about bodies than there was even 10 years ago.
Interesting. Very interesting. Thank you. All right, do you want to know another interesting one?
Yeah, go for it.
I think it's interesting. You, dear listener, are welcome to judge me as nerdy as you like. Right, on the 14th of March, which incidentally was my friend Sarah's birthday, and I really should have sent her something. I must remember after this podcast. Two authors, Winstanley and Robke et al., so lots of authors, published in Nature, and they are from somewhere in Australia. University of Adelaide published an interesting paper in Nature Comms on telomeres. Are we all familiar with telomeres? The ends of our chromosomes, the long pieces of DNA, they have repeating regions on each end, and every time your cell replicates, it knocks one of those off. It is in effect a fuse or a countdown timer. Now, that was the view about 10 or 15 years ago. So your number of telomere repeats would dictate how many times your cell got to replicate. That has since been disproven. Cells can add telomeres under certain conditions. It is not as countdown or a timery as we thought it was. But if you have a cell with more telomere repeats, in general, it will find it easier to replicate and easier to do its job after having replicated a few dozen, 100 times, whatever. These folks looked at what happens to very, very early embryos. So within, say, 36 hours, 72 hours of formation, of conception. And it looks like, if you can extend from mouse models into people, which many times you can and sometimes you can't, but in a mouse model, if you expose these really, really, really early embryos to oxidative stress, so the sort of thing that would happen if the mother was a smoker, or if exposed to certain drugs, or certain diets, or had a really bad cold, the cells in the embryo end up with fewer telomeres, which sounds really sciencey and boring, but what it means is that in much later life, if this was a person, say, after the age of 50 or so, though the descendants of those cells are going to be less able to do their jobs. Now, there's a quite sensationalist write-up of this in earth.com, and we'll include a link in the post that accompanies this podcast. But they go on to talk about how this could lead to degenerative diseases and changes in ability later in life, all because of, what are they? Oh, they blame it on prescription drug use around the time of conception. Personally, I would say that there are a million things that raise the amount of reactive oxygen around the uterus at that sort of time. And if this effect carries over from mice into people, then it ain't just aspirin, folks. It's the amount of sugar in your diet. It's the amount of stress you're under. It's the air pollution in the environment you're in. There are 100 different ways to alleviate the amount of reactive oxygen stress in your body. And doing just a few of them is, in a very nebulous, hard-to-track way, likely to mean that your offspring has better health later in life because of this telomere effect. And probably 100 other effects, but this is one that's now been proven as of last week.
Fascinating. And you mentioned that cells can add telomeres in certain conditions.
I did.
So it sounds like, if I was going to be very simplistic, but also a little bit hopeful, those offspring, even if the mothers had been exposed to stress around the time when that embryo was tiny, it would mean that those offspring would have to work harder at every point in life to get to the same level, right? They might have a lower threshold before things became a problem.
Potentially. There are two rebuttals to that. Mm-hmm. One is that once you've added telomeres, if the system works how I think it does, then you don't have to worry about doing it again. So you've got a cell line, and if you get in at germ cell level, so very, very early on in life, and you have a period of good health and good fortune, you should be able to push that effect all over the body. But this is a really, really early effect. We're dealing with handfuls of cells, hundreds at most. Effects that affect. Things that happen to cells when there aren't many of them. When those cells then multiply up to being the billions and billions and billions of cells that we're made of, you're looking at big populations that then have to change in order to restore health. So it's possible, it's difficult. But on that topic of being hopeful, and I like it when you're hopeful, I like it when I'm hopeful. I live for hope. Anyway, the doctors Winstanley and Robka go on to talk about metformin and other treatments that might be given to these embryos via their mothers, doubtless, to restore their telomeres very, very early on. Now, sure, if this is a way to treat somebody who knows they have had a toxic exposure, brilliant, great. If this is a thing that enables you to get away without telomere damage after living in a really polluted environment, even better. I feel like this is, if this turns out to be one of the major causes of the health damage of living in weird environments, I'm glad there's potential hope. Anyway, they test 3 substances. Metformin was one of them. I can't remember the other 2. Don't give me that look. And they saw improvements against all 3.
That sounds awesome.
Which I thought was quite interesting.
Did you know that parrots also, you can see loss of telomeres if you keep African grey parrots on their own?
I did not, but I can imagine that must be a very stressful environment leading to increased cell turnover and telomere loss.
Yeah, I remember reading
horrible.
about that, I think in my first year as a vet, when I was seeing an awful lot of very sad parrots. And I was like, oh my goodness, their poor little telomeres are also wasting away.
African greys, to be very transparent for people who are listening and don't know what African greys are, they are incredibly intelligent, very social Central African and West African parrots. They are grey with a red tail. People keep them because they are so clever. They learn how to talk and fantastic. They also get really, really, really stressed out in captivity, and you should never keep them there, so don't.
But on the note of hope, do you remember those really happy African greys we saw in the tree in Ghana?
I do remember being in the middle of a rainforest in Ghana in dusty dry season when the sky was pinky orange, watching huge groups of African greys flying around having a great time.
That was amazing.
And you could see their telomeres just trailing out.
Yeah, absolutely. So long.
It was like watching parrots. Not parrots. What do you call them? The big ones with the eyes on the tail. Peacocks. It was like watching peacocks. It would have been a better joke if I hadn't eaten half of it. All right. That's enough. Enough news. Do we have any events this week to talk about?
No, but next week's article I'm really excited about because we've been doing lots and lots of stuff at work looking at the effects of Ozempic and the GLP-1 receptor agonists on the world, on society, on health generally. And I'm really keen to think about actually how do you create children, how do you raise children in ways that mean that they'll never need Ozempic.
Interesting. Very interesting. I look forward to learning more, as I always do when I read your articles. Okay, you said that we are talking about sleep today. I am intrigued. It is possibly my favourite thing in the entire world. Like sleep, maybe beetles are up there. I like a beetle, but sleep is also the best. What is it that is so important about sleeping?
Sleep is conserved across almost every animal species. Even like tiny like water fleas sleep. They have and that's because sleep is a time when your body repairs itself. I think we've used the analogy before of a Formula One car that has to perform incredibly well, but it also needs occasionally to be able to repair, to fix problems that have occurred, to replace tyres, etc. And you cannot fix and replace while you are performing at your peak level.
Yeah,
and
like
that
the
is why
flip side of that would be a steam engine, right? That you can fix while it's trundling along, but it maxes out at 14 miles an hour and burns 18 litres per half mile. I get it. So vehicles that you have to fix, vehicles that you have to stop to fix, can be much faster and more competitive.
Exactly.
How does that apply to life?
There are loads and loads of your body tissues that can't repair while they are being used. Think of your eye, for example.
Okay.
Front of your eye.
Cornea.
Right, cornea. Yeah, absolutely transparent. If it's transparent, where's its blood?
That is a horrible question I have never considered. I don't know.
So the cornea, the way that cornea fixes is when your eyelids are closed, you get diffusion of oxygen and nutrients.
The cornea's blood vessels are on the inside of the eyelid.
Yep.
That's insane. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so all the time your eyes are awake. You're having, I know you very well, you're having the wind from the
Wow,
bicycle.
she says I'm having wind. Horrendous.
Blowing and desiccating the front of your corneas. You're blinking, your eyes are watering. Your poor little corneas are dry and cold and just desperate to fix themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But all the time you're using them, you can't. And so you know how your eyes get really itchy and they get kind of scratchy and you rub them, and it's the kind of universal human sign for needing to sleep?
Yeah, baby sign.
Baby sign, it's like sleepy eyes, right? That's because your corneas want your eyelids to close, and they need to just get all of the goodness and the juices and the immune cells and everything to fix them from your eyelids.
I like that. I have... now you've dredged up a memory from somewhere years ago. Fingers and toes are similar, aren't they? You need more fluid than is in a finger to maintain a finger, but you need less fluid than that to use a finger. Have I remembered that right?
I've never heard that before, but I love it.
I was doing hand lecture. So I used to be a monkey and chimp and gorilla vet, for people who don't know that. All 6 of you. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I talk about it too often. And I was reading up on hand surgery and stuff, and there was a piece that I read years ago, and I can't reference. I'm sorry, bad scientist. That said that the amount of tissue fluid in your fingers is not enough to maintain your fingers. They are very dry tissues because they need to be incredibly flexible and dexterous. Mm-hmm. And at night, you get whenever you're sleeping, night for most apes and monkeys. Day for eyes and other weird prosimians, some of them. You get a flush of fluid down to your hands, I assume also your feet, I didn't check, that enables them to do their reparations, their repairs and all of that. And that, of course, is a sleep effect, isn't it?
That's really cool. Do you remember when I used the infrared camera on my feet to look at the temperature before I went to bed and then in the middle of the night?
Yes. This is not just a weird kink thing. This is business.
Isn't it great that it is actually business? Genuinely is our job.
I love our job.
So I took a photo of my feet just before I went to bed, and it was pretty cold. Our house is pretty cold, apart from one room which we heat up, so it's nice and cosy where we are at the moment. But before I went to bed, I took a photo of my feet on the carpet, and my feet were almost exactly the same colour as the carpet, which meant they were the same, and it was about 17 degrees. So the skin on my feet was at 17 degrees. And most of you are probably thinking, hang on a moment, we know that human body temperature isn't at 17 degrees. Well, that, my friend, is because you're not actually measuring your foot skin. You're measuring your core temperature. And actually, the appendages of your body can get way, way, way colder than that for really, really long times. So I looked at my poor little feet before I went to bed, 17 degrees, woke up about 1 a.m. I think I tried to time it in sleep cycles. And my feet were absolutely luminous. They were right up there, 37.5 degrees.
On the camera. They were luminous on the camera. They were not glowing in the dark.
They do. Every night I'm like, whoa, it's too bright.
It's very hard to sleep in Gwen's room because of her glowing feet. No, she had the infrared camera was showing off temperature, and the hotter things are, the brighter they get.
Yeah.
Carry on, Gwen.
No, exactly. I think that's just such a great like way to show it. Your feet can't fix themselves if they're running at 17 degrees, right?
Of course they can't. And that flush of extra blood and extra fluid brings with it temperature.
But if you ask most people, Greg,
yeah,
they're not going to say feet and eyes, are they, about sleep? What are they going to say?
They're going to say brain. They're going to say that sleep is the time when we... well, it depends how much they've read. But if they've read as much as I have, they are going to look at you with a blank stare and go, oh, don't ask me this question. There's a million things that happen to the brain during sleep. But major ones are cementing memories, moving memories from short-term to long-term, practicing skills, emotionally regulating memories, so taking the sting out of painful memories and taking the weird obsession out of nice memories. What else happens during sleep? Dreams, very important for giving you weird inspiration and making you wonder about whether or not you fancy your mother. I assume. I don't know. Okay, so is that the full list?
Yeah.
What else is going on in the brain there?
No, I think that's most of it. I was actually just thinking, do you remember... I feel like I read this paper a little while ago that looked at what happens, like why animals die if they can't sleep. I feel like there were some horrible rat studies.
There were. The 11-day rat study is my least favourite. They put rats in an enclosure, as many scientists do, but this enclosure was on a pivot and it could move by about 10 degrees in each direction, and they had a motion tracker on it. And if the rats stopped moving for any more than about 10 seconds, the enclosure would jerk and it would pivot and wake the rats up. In that way, they enforced a sleeplessness. They tracked the temperature of the rats, they tracked the rats' food intake, and eventually they tracked when the rats died, because that's what happened. After about 11 days, the rats dropped dead. Sleep is absolutely critical, and if you don't do it for long enough, you die. But the other interesting thing about it is that the rats failed to generate temperature. They got colder and colder, and their food intake went up and up. So normally you would expect, in an efficient body running how it's meant to, you put calories in, you get calories out, normally as temperature, sometimes as movement. These rats were pouring calories in and not getting temperature effects out of it. They were not digesting it very well. They were not putting it down the right metabolic pathways.
Because nothing had been fixed.
Nothing had been fixed. So all the metabolic pathways generate byproducts and they need repair. And if you're not repairing them, you have to take worse and worse and worse routes as you block up and gum up various other pathways. And even your gut, right? It requires sleep in order to repair.
I do remember one of the things I mentioned in the article called Sleeping Like a Baby, last week's article, talked about celebrating and valuing sleep. And so we've always talked with the children about celebrating and valuing sleep. But I do remember my poor little 5-year-old who woke up and had had a really bad night's sleep. And I went in and she was looking really sad. I said, "How are you?" She's like, "I did not sleep very well, but my skin has not started to fall off yet." And we were like, it's about 10 days of no sleep at all. Not
this was
bad
my
night.
fault, and I feel terrible about this. I had previously done a sponsored challenge, which I'm absolutely sure some people listening sponsored me, so thank you. I earned about £10,000 by doing a "don't stop moving until you fall over" challenge. And after 70-ish hours, I eventually passed out in a ditch. No, I didn't. I passed out inside, but it was horrible. But because I had not been sleeping, I had not been repairing my skin, I did lose a few chunks of skin. It was odd, really weird. And I had long-term eye damage. Anyway, my daughter had taken from that if you don't get enough sleep, your skin falls off. But look, that's not what this podcast is about. We're not here to terrorise young children much. And neither are we here to just list out all the things that go wrong when you don't sleep. There are many lists online of the benefits of sleep. Just ask anybody, ask any AI, ask any search engine for a list of the benefits of a good night's sleep, and you will find hundreds of them. Metabolic, developmental, behavioural, cognitive, loads of them, hormonal. But there is a difference between how people in weird cultures sleep, how well they sleep, and how people in more traditional cultures sleep, as in how well they sleep. Gwen, what did you see while travelling in terms of that difference?
I think one of the things that really stood out to me, Greg, was that I spent a lot of time in the UK in mother and baby groups and talking to mothers, and sleep always comes up. You know, we're all chugging our coffee, we're all desperately trying to keep our eyes open. It's the kind of sole topic of conversation. And yet it never came up. I never saw any indication that these mothers felt that their sleep was poor. And I think the word "feel" is really important here, because I think in the West we often have quite unreasonable expectations of sleep, which also is part of the problem. But the problems that weird people often report in terms of not being able to get to sleep, waking up really easily, spending long times awake during the night, these don't seem to be things that are as much of a preoccupation in other cultures. In fact, so much so that some traditional cultures don't even have a word for insomnia or sleeplessness.
Interesting. Okay, so clearly difficulty getting to sleep, difficulty staying asleep, and waking up feeling like dirt are very famous, very troublesome effects of living in weird cultures. So much so that the NHS has spent millions on studies and suggestions here on, I should have recorded the URL, but it's definitely a .nhs.gov thing. .gov? Whatever. It's an NHS website page. There is a good list of ways to improve sleep as an adult in the UK. Gwen, Can you tell us what those are, or would you like me to? Because I have the list right in front of me.
Oh, have you got the list? Go for it.
It's right here. I have it copied down. I just didn't write down the URL because I'm a fool. All right, so they list out three things: internal factors, time perception factors, and sleep environment factors. Their internal factors are stress, anxiety, depression, so that kind of mental state piece. And then there's the alcohol, caffeine, drugs. That's the physiological, the chemical state going on. Their time perception factors here are shift work. So are you moving when you need to be active and when you need to sleep away from a normal circadian rhythm? Or jet lag. So have you gone from one normal circadian rhythm and you're trying to get to another normal circadian rhythm? Both things that our ancestors would not have had to deal with. Although there is a really interesting thing about, the night owls and morning larks differentiation. There's a nice hypothesis that there are types of people like that, so that there's always somebody awake around camp to keep an eye out for, I assume, saber-toothed cats or terror birds or something. Very cute, but completely pointless to this discussion. Then there's sleep environment factors. They talk about noise. So quieter is easier to sleep. They talk about having a comfortable bed. Oh my word, there's a million things to unpack there. They talk about how a firmer bed might help you to sleep, and softer bed, although it might be nice to sit in very briefly, won't help you sleep throughout the night. And then there's the one that everybody knows, which is cool down your room a bit and you'll sleep better. Those are the NHS's list. The thing that I noticed reading that, and I'm interested to hear your response, is I've seen a lot of people in various non-weird cultures in South America and Africa sleeping just fine, having got basically every single one of those wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doing shift work, having a coffee just before they go to bed, like anxious as heck because they have to get up in 2 hours and do ridiculous construction work, which should not be allowed. OSHA needs to go to South America. And sleeping in really, really loud, really bright places, but just out like logs. What's going on? What is happening there?
So this is something that I've thought about a lot, because it seems when you read a list and you think, well, isn't it fortunate that we have all of these devices and ways to manipulate our environment to allow us to achieve it? You do have to step back and think, what is the point? What is the piece that we're missing here? Where does that learning come from? Or what is missing in our culture that should be providing this instead of the devices? And I think what's going on, Greg, is that we spend so much time and money thinking about how to make our children sleep.
Yeah, I think that's entirely reasonable. So you're talking about things like white noise generators and fancy mattresses, yes?
Yeah.
But these clearly are meeting those well-proven list of NHS ways to sleep well. Why is it that meeting the NHS proven, and I'm not knocking the NHS here, they have done the research that these are evidenced, proven ways to sleep better. Why is it that helping a child to sleep in that way sets you up to sleep worse? So
we often conflate the ideas of treatment and prevention within our culture. We think if something treats a disease, then maybe doing it or doing more of it might prevent it in the first place. And this list of factors from the NHS, this is about treatment. This is a web page that people visit when they are not able to sleep, and it's providing guidelines about why that might be happening and things that they might be able to address. The problem is, Greg, is that children are not adults.
I mean, they reckon they are.
I mean, they think they are, but for anyone who has ever seen a child's ability to fall asleep, they will know that it's light years different from an adult.
Yeah, fair.
Children fall asleep anywhere. They fall asleep in the car. I mean, very frequently, because that is in effect a white noise generator, which is temperature controlled, and you've got
gently rocking.
I mean, you couldn't think of a better way to send a child to sleep. But when we were away, we saw kids sleeping on mats at the side of parties. We saw kids sleeping in hammocks. We saw people making bed frames, which were basically just woven sheets of sticks that you stuck a blanket on top.
We saw kids sleeping on slabs of concrete in the shade.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Under trees. Kids have evolved to sleep anywhere, and that ability to sleep anywhere is not a coincidence. It is a very deliberate evolutionary strategy.
Why? Well, why is it that kids need to be able to do that and adults don't?
Kids need to be able to sleep because A, they've got a much higher requirement for sleep, but B, they need to learn how to set the thresholds that they're going to react to in adulthood. Because adults will have to sleep more lightly because they need to be aware of danger, they need to be able to respond to children, etc. You will never sleep as well as you did in childhood. So in childhood, you want to learn how to sleep anywhere. Mm-hmm. So in adulthood, you don't wake too easily. You don't struggle to fall asleep. You've had the practice of learning how to deal with the difficult things when sleep comes easily. So when sleep is not so easy, you can cope with a higher degree of difficulty.
Okay. So you're talking about here the exact same thing that's come up a couple of times here, that short-term win versus long-term win. For people who may not have listened to every episode of the podcast or read Gwen's entire book, Growing Up Weird, which is phenomenal, by the way. Don't worry, I got a very nice smile for that one. It's totally worth plugging.
Thanks, Greg.
Book. Yeah. It is really good. The idea of Western cultures, weird cultures, take a short-term win over a long-term win every single time. And this idea that you have to, if I've understood you right, Gwen, that you have to set your threshold for what is an acceptable sleeping environment young, so that throughout the rest of your life you can sleep in that acceptable sleep environment. So then, following that through logically, I'm really worried about what you're about to tell me. What is the effect of, in effect, training people to sleep in a Western, NHS-dictated, perfectly quiet, dark bedroom?
So, unsurprisingly, the studies have not been done looking at exactly this question. When we're talking very, very long studies, they're very expensive. But I suspect that a child who learns to sleep in a perfect environment, when they become an adult, they will have those expectations for the perfect environment. So, as an example, a child who's always slept alone in their own room, in where it's the right temperature, they've got the blackout curtains, they're going to really struggle when they share a room, when they have anything other than that setup. And it's one thing, actually, Greg, that I found really funny about weird cultures, and it was highlighted to me by a woman I spoke to in one of the villages, is that in her culture, you have a baby in the same room as you and you look after the baby, and then when they get bigger, they have their own room and their own bed or their own hammock. And in Western cultures, she said you put the baby in their own place, and then when they grow up, you expect them to share a bed with their partner. I mean, sharing a bed with a partner is quite a Western cultural thing. It certainly is not the case worldwide, but we do. We're like, right, baby, you learn to sleep in this perfect environment, and now you're going to have to share a bed with your partner because it's a sign of love, intimacy. What was that stat you once told me about the number of divorces that have snoring cited in there?
28%.
28%.
I believe, if I remember that right. About roughly a third of divorces in the US, their initial citing includes snoring.
Partner snoring. And obviously there's a whole other article on snoring, we're not even going to touch that.
Have you written that one yet?
I've touched on it in one of them called Breathtaking. But certainly, just the differences between what we create a child to sleep in and actually what they're going to need to do as an adult is really very strange. But I think the one thing I will say, Greg, is that I'm really, really not knocking parents here, because there are many reasons that parents desperately need their babies to sleep because of very few other caregivers, early return to work, difficulties breastfeeding. All of these pieces mean that parents really, really want their babies to sleep. But there's one other thing that I think might be a contributor.
I'm listening.
Did you know that babies nowadays seem to wake up more?
I have heard this, that there was studies, I forget when it was, looking at how often babies wake up throughout the night. And if you compare them to today, it just sounds absolutely idyllic.
Yeah, and it's easy to look back on. There are some studies where the babies are fed on cow's milk, and they're basically sleep trained, institutionalized, and those created the guidelines for how babies should sleep. But actually, if you look at babies, even breastfeeding babies appear to be waking up more now than they were even 60, 70, 100 years ago. And I was talking to a professor of sleep medicine about this, and she was saying it's one of the absolute mysteries of sleep medicine as to why this could be happening. But I wonder, Greg, if it might be about sugar.
About the appetite increase effects.
Yeah.
So for anybody who is not already well versed on the effects of fructose, Gwen's written a couple of great articles about it. But very, 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 very cut down version, it's an appetite stimulant. And the thing is, babies probably aren't getting any fructose. Isn't that right?
Unfortunately, babies get fructose. So fructose crosses the placenta. So we know that fructose in the mother leads to fructose in the amniotic fluid, which the baby is in effect bathed in.
Okay.
But also fructose crosses into the breast milk as well. So babies can get a double whammy of fructose depending on on how old they are. And actually, certainly in the US, I think in the UK it's illegal, but definitely around the world there are formula milks that have fructose in and sucrose in as well.
Grim. Okay, that's dystopian. Let's not go too deeply down that particular alleyway.
The only point that I will say is that we know that in adulthood, sugar consumption is definitely associated with insomnia, whether that is appetite stimulation, whether that is driving a kind of foraging response, we're not sure, but there are clear links in adulthood between sugar and insomnia, and I would be very surprised if that doesn't occur in babies as well.
Yeah, that is interesting. Okay, so a little bit to finish then on solutions. If you had children, we do. What would you do for them to give them the best odds of being able to sleep whenever they want, wherever they want, when they're older?
Oh, great question. So, baby sleep is such a minefield. Greg, I'm going to ask you to give the first pointer here.
You mean because I'm a father and less likely to be judged societally than a mother would be? Gladly. So I would say that all of these adverts you see for ultra slumber fluff mattresses that are £9 million and feel like you're lying on the back of a panda coated with cotton wool, do not fall for that nonsense. Babies will sleep anywhere. They don't need an ultra slumber fluff panda mattress. A blanket folded up and put on a board is absolutely fine. Don't give them a pillow. Don't ever introduce a pillow because they don't need it. And if you can keep that padding quite thin, again, there's another great article on this somewhere, they will move around a bit while they're asleep, and that stretching and joint movement will help them feel better the day after. But that's not the point. The point is they won't be limited to one single sleeping surface. So mix it up. Slightly harder one week, slightly softer the week after. I think the important thing I'd say, and this is going to make me unpopular, and that's fine. I've been unpopular my whole life. Bring it on. Is that you are trading off short-term comfort against long-term gain. If you put children on a slightly less comfortable surface, they're going to wake up ever so slightly more. And if you are right at the edge of how much sleep you've got, and you need every moment of sleep, then you don't have enough slack in your family system to handle this. And that's not your fault. That is current weird working culture and limited time off and limited family support and living in really small groups and all that. But, dude, if you're right at the edge of how much sleep you can handle, then putting your baby onto more uncomfortable bedding is going to crash you through some sort of horrible threshold where everything feels like hell forever. So maybe wait until you've had a good few nights sleep before you start doing this.
Yeah.
That would be my piece of advice, Gwen.
I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be nearly as bad as you expect. I do think we have this belief because we like the comfortable things.
Yeah, that's true.
I honestly think that Greg did say slightly less. I very much doubt most people would even notice.
That is true.
Oh, my next piece of advice: keep it unpredictably noisy. Don't whisper and tiptoe around your baby. Let your baby's brain get used to birdsong in spring. Let the baby, get used to. Yeah, absolutely. Their siblings waking up and talking about guinea pigs stealing their muffin or whatever the sleep talking they're going to do. Just don't worry about the noise. Let them learn to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great shout.
Allergy for you, Greg?
Oh, allergy. There's a one. This is slightly off-piste. A huge number of children develop allergy. We've done a podcast about it already. Mm-hmm. There are lots of articles that Gwen's written about it. Not being able to breathe easily will stop you sleeping. Having a high immune stress response will stop you sleeping. Not having any good night's sleep between the ages of 3 and 6 will get in the way of your ability to learn to have a good night's sleep. So it's not just interrupting your sleeping, it's interrupting your ability to learn to have a good night's sleep. So yeah, get on top of your allergies. Learn about your dosings for cetirizine and loratadine. Make sure you're not messing with barriers. And listen to Gwen's podcast on allergy. Mm-hmm.
And also, if you are told to take an antihistamine, take a non-drowsy, or your child take an antihistamine, take a non-drowsy one. Because did you know, Greg, that both allergies and drowsy antihistamines are linked to the development of ADHD in children, but they're both through sleep deprivation.
Oh, that sucks.
So yeah, the way to break that trade-off, use a non-drowsy antihistamine on a child.
Right, so it's right. To be clear here, being unconscious and being asleep are very different. Well, they're not very different things. They are different things. Mm-hmm. Sleep is a very active process of repair. Unconsciousness just means you're out cold, you're not moving, and you're not thinking. Unconsciousness is part of sleep, but sleep is not unconsciousness. If you are taking a drowsy antihistamine and it puts you in a coma, a short coma normally, that is not sleep. You may fall asleep, you may have sleep as part of it, but it's not putting you to sleep. Same with anesthetics. Mm-hmm. So, be careful of thinking that a drowsy antihistamine will improve your sleep. Mm-hmm. It might not.
My point would be, next point, don't heat or cool the room as much as you can.
Interesting, okay. Seasonal change, yeah. So obviously you want children to be warm enough so that they can sleep, but don't try and make the air temperature a consistent temperature. Kids sleep very differently when it's very hot. I remember this vividly, Greg, the very sweaty little children in their sweaty little hammocks at 34 degrees and 100% humidity. Kids can sleep. Let them learn to sleep in different temperatures. It's like horrible cinema hot dogs just rotating and glistening.
Ugh, so glistening.
They were awful.
Just on their little tiny noses with all the beads of sweat.
Okay, yeah, that's disgusting. All right, we're out of time here, so are there any last things you want people to think about or hold in mind while they're considering how young people learn to sleep and how that helps them be old people who can sleep well?
Yeah, the last thing I'm going to say is that if you think your child's ever going to want to share a room with another person in their life, maybe consider letting them share a room in childhood so they can learn those skills.
Yeah, I like that. Obviously, there are things about sharing a room that will help you sleep. There's mirroring, there's listening, there's watching and modelling of going to sleep and waking up and all of that. But if you discount sleep in the present and you think about sleep in the future, learning to sleep in a room with somebody in it will help you a lot if you do the traditional sleeping in another room when you're married thing. Fascinating. Guinevere, thank you very much for talking to me about learning to sleep and this idea of setting up kids to be picky sleepers. It's fascinating. We will be back next week. I have no idea what we're talking about. Gwen probably knows because she knows most things, but I'm not even going to ask her just yet. We have been Dr. Guinevere Bradbury and me, Greg Dickens. This has been Growing Up Weird. See you next week.
Bye.